Welcome to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman, a new innovative radio show that taps into what's happening now in the medical industry, featuring fitness experts, foodies, and medical professionals. Get it right here and be an active participant in your health. Mixed messages about what is best for your health can make you feel like you're on a runaway train. So hop on and have some fun while Liz navigates this medical mystery ride. Call 888-565-1470 and ask Liz, your source for the latest medical technology and long life advice. All aboard. Here's Liz Goodman.
Hi, good evening and welcome to Live and Fit with Liz Goodman. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight's show is going to be a little bit different than what I normally talk about. Normally, it's all about me keeping you healthy and fit and speaking to doctors about different ways that you could talk to them and call in by calling 888-565-1470 and asking questions about medical information for yourself. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me that was very disturbing in my neighborhood. One of my neighbors' son, young kid, in college, he invited a friend over to spend the night, and unfortunately, the kid must have done heroin and OD'd in my friend's son's bed in the middle of the night. And it was extremely devastating and traumatic for her, for myself, for her child, obviously for the family whose child died of this absolutely horrendous opiate choice addiction that he made. What was really disturbing for me as well is that the ambulances and the police and everybody pulled up in front of my home as I was taking my 9 and 10-year-old to school. And I felt it was my obligation to explain to them kind of what was going on. And now they didn't know anything about drugs. They've never learned that at school yet. They're only in 4th and 5th grade. And I decided to have a conversation with them so that it would be a poignant memory in their life for the rest of their life. And I told them, a little bit about what drugs are and how when the day comes as they get older and somebody says to them that you should smoke a joint or shoot up heroin or try cocaine or whatever is going to come their way, because it comes to everybody's way in their life at some point, they should remember that moment when they left for school and they were petrified because there were all these ambulances and fire trucks and police officers showing up at our door. And it was a frightening experience for them, and I hope they'll tap into that. So tonight, what I've done is I've invited a dear friend of mine, somebody that I work with, and I'm going to be working quite a bit with in a new place that he's opening up. I'm going to just introduce him to you right now. His name is Jack Friedman. He's one of the founding partners of the soon-to-open Dr. Furman's Health Oasis, which is a groundbreaking treatment center right here in Boca Raton. It's for the treatment of eating disorders and the reversal of food addictions, among other illnesses related to poor diet. Dr. Furman's a renowned author of over 25 books, Eat to Live and The End of Heart Disease, to name a few. But the reason I've invited Jack here tonight, he's my boss at the center, but more importantly, he's worked for 28 years in the addiction field and developed and owned his own treatment facilities that he serviced in Boca Raton nationally and soon internationally, having that kind of experience. And he's familiar with all aspects of treating the addictive process and specifically knows a lot. He's an expert in the field of opiate addiction. So I want to say thank you for joining me, Jack, tonight. I know I kind of pulled you in last minute, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Liz. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So the reason, I told you that I brought you here, Jack, is because after this devastating experience for my friend, and on the news, we're being continually hit over the head with all of these deaths across the country and how heroin has made a resurgence. And it's not just the fact that they're doing heroin. It's all the things that are being laced with this heroin and the different incarnations of drugs these days. It's just not the drugs that people in the 70s and 80s did. They're so much more potent and so much more frightening, correct?
That's one of the factors, sure. The other factor is that we have a lot more media outlets, beside the one that we're on. And so everything gets magnified. And so people hear the word epidemic a lot.
Okay.
And so everybody thinks we're living in this unique situation of a drug epidemic. But this is something that's been happening in this country in cycles since the early 1900s. and right through our modern time. What's different now is that everything is publicized and everything is magnified because, first of all, the country's larger, the society is much more open, and people are a lot more knowledgeable, supposedly, about addiction. In fact, all the components that are happening in our society right now that impact us, such as race relations, economics, health insurance concerns, politics, all of that is impacting what we're seeing right now. For instance, what's happening right now is that, for the most part, heroin users and heroin ODs are happening among young white people. This is a unique situation in many ways. Not that young white people haven't always experimented with drugs, but not to the extent that they are now. But heroin in particular was always pictured as a drug of the underclass, of poor people, of people in ghettos, of people who had no access to any hope in life. That's not what's happening right now. And so when well-to-do white youngsters, college-age people, college students start dying in droves, then you'll see a lot of activity around it.
Well, as a matter of fact, this particular boy, he was the child of doctors. So he's a white child. His family was, in that world. And so, I know we talked a little bit about before the show that this is an epidemic even with doctors. I mean, they're doing drugs themselves, and it's a very trying time in our society. Now, is it that we're more aware because there's more access to media through social media, or is it that people are doing it more heavily than they were in the past, or a combination of both?
Probably both. Years ago, if someone was a heroin addict, they were prone to being incarcerated simply for being a heroin addict or gathering with other heroin addicts. They didn't have to be caught holding drugs or using drugs. Today's society is much different. There are very few people who are not aware of treatment as an option, of drug use as an ongoing thing in society, and they can talk about it. So it's a different situation. Also, we are now living. I came up in the '60s, and at that time, that was probably what they used to call the me generation, was probably the first generation that openly used and promoted drug use. We are now in about the fourth generation. So you have kids now who have watched their parents use drugs. And when I say use drugs, I don't mean the parents are sitting in the living room necessarily shooting heroin, although that unfortunately happens too. But you've got parents who routinely smoke marijuana, who...
Well, it's accepted now in society, right?
It's accepted in parts of society. It does not mean it's not harmful. The most accepted drug in society is alcohol. And alcohol is one of the most, if not the most destructive drug that we have in our society, killing many more people on a yearly basis than heroin ever will. So the environment in the home, the environment in society, and especially the environment in the institutions that these young people are going through, such as colleges and schools, really lends itself to some very dangerous practices. Then the other things that you astutely mentioned early on is that the drugs that people are taking now are much more powerful by design and by accident than drugs before. Years ago, people did not know about fentanyl. Drug dealers are very astute and very cagey in promoting their products. They're excellent marketers. Sorry.
No.
No. That's how. And so they have been.
They're better than me, that's for sure.
They have been adding. Well, they have a more attractive product than almost anybody else. The first one is free is an old joke, but it's not that funny anymore.
Well, I'm just looking online as we were speaking, and in 2015, there were almost 30,000 deaths from opiates and 174 overdoses in 6 days in Cincinnati that were reported. I mean, that's just,
That's an epidemic. So what is an epidemic? An epidemic is, and here's an interesting thing. I looked up the definition of epidemic before we came on. So an epidemic is an outbreak a rapid spread of a contagious disease in a community. So now we're thinking, is drug addiction a contagious disease? Well, it's not contagious in the way that we're normally taught to think of contagion, that is a virus or a bacteria.
No, it's more viral, like it is in like a social media viral, right?
But it's contagious in the sense that in an environment that fosters drug use, it will spread rapidly, and that's what we're seeing. And in an environment where people take risks, and young people, particularly teenage to college year adults, are programmed genetically to take risks. If they didn't take risks in those years, they would not get ahead in life. They would not advance. So we are hardwired to take risks at that age. So the old expression that, he thinks he's going to live forever, that's actually true for young people, especially teenagers. And of course, to our eyes, later on in life, we know sadly that that's not true, that they don't live forever.
Let me give you an example of what happened yesterday.
Sure.
in my own personal experience with my neighbors and her child. I said to him point blank, you've had one friend overdose and die in your bed the other day, and a couple of months ago another friend comatose for several weeks. That's 2 strikes. At what point do you have to say to yourself, I've been given a warning from somewhere above, and I have another shot at life, and it's time to just change my life, change my course, change my direction? And his response was very interesting. I thought it would be immediately, oh my God, I'm so relieved. I'm so fortunate that this didn't happen to me, and I'm devastated over what happened to my friends. Instead, his response was, well, what I've learned is never to do heroin. And I said, well, you could have a drink and go out in your car and be killed. You can overdose from alcohol poisoning. You could have a joint and it was laced with something. This isn't about just heroin. It's about doing anything or everything that can cause you to be in a scenario that can kill you. And for you to respond that way, I said to my friend, I hope you don't mind that I'm talking to your son this way, but that is, I'm very saddened by that response. That's what I said to him.
Well, that's a very predictable response. Denial is denial mixed with a youngster's lack of proper respect and fear for death is exactly what you're hearing. And also, he does not want to stop using drugs. That's what he's telling you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's another factor to all of this, and that is where do all these people get addicted to opiate drugs? And I asked a friend of mine, Dr. Morales, to call in today, and Dr. Aldo Morales he's
right. I'm trying to see if he's going to call right now. I'm trying to let him know.
We're trying to get him, if we can get him to call, because he's an ASAM certified physician, a psychiatrist of high standing in the community, and has worked in a number of facilities. And he's a lecturer on these subjects and very knowledgeable. So I hope he gets a chance to call in.
Yeah, because there's unfortunately not a way that I can call out. And if he can't call in tonight,
That's
then
all right.
what I'll do is I'll make sure that he gets onto the show in the future.
He'll be a great guest for you.
But I know he can answer questions that you can't.
But what I wanted to start with is that many of the people who are addicted to heroin today, particularly younger people of the type we're talking about, started their opiate addiction, unlike previous years, by taking opiate or opioid pills, oxycodone,
What does that mean?
OxyContin. An opioid pill is a painkiller. And so there's been a big movement in the medical community in the past 10 to 15 years that pain management people in pain are underserved.
Oh, he's on the phone.
Oh, great.
Wonderful. Okay. Hello?
Hello there.
Hi, Dr. Morales. We were just talking about you. I just need you to speak up a little bit on your phone because it's hard to hear. I don't know if you heard any of the conversation that was happening. Were you able to hear it at all?
I heard the tail end of that.
Okay, so again, I'm going to just politely ask you to speak up a little bit or closer into your phone because we're having a little bit of a hard time hearing. But what we're talking about and what Jack was just talking about is a lot of these heroin addicts, these children today, they begin their addictions because they were on some sort of opiate painkiller like oxycodone or something like that. One, is that true? And two, I'm really, what I'm grateful to have you calling for is because I really want you to tell parents or even just husbands and wives what the specific signs are that they need to see, the early warning signs that a family member or a friend that they love might be doing an opiate. And then what is the best way to approach that person so it doesn't frighten them off or scare them off so that they won't want to maybe listen to you, get some, listen to their loved one and actually take action and get some help?
Okay, so we are definitely in the midst of an epidemic of painkillers and heroin. They are both in the same category. The roots of the epidemic go back to the late 90s when it was claimed that doctors were not paying enough attention to the relief of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1998, the VA medical centers adopted pain as the fifth vital sign. So when you go to the doctor's office, they will typically, there's 4 vital signs. They will check your blood pressure, your heart rate, your temperature, and your respiratory rate. But beginning in the late 90s, they started checking your pain level. And your doctor would say, well, at your doctor's office, they would ask, well, what is your pain level today? And that began to promote the treatment of pain. Doctors were encouraged to be more liberal with their pain prescribing habit. And they began to prescribe opioid analgesics, which is painkillers, as Jack was saying, in more and more amounts.
So they actually caused the epidemic at that point, and now we're trying to find ways to reverse it.
Yes, to the point that now the FDA has, the AMA, the American Medical Association, is now promoting that we should eliminate pain as the fifth vital sign, that perhaps we're paying too much attention to that.
So that's really how it went. Excuse me for 1 second. So that's how it went from a street drug to an everyman white man's drug, in a sense.
Correct, with the medical prescription.
Mm-hmm.
Now, today, the FDA issued a warning, just today. It's called a black box warning, and that's the loudest warning that the FDA can issue to doctors about the dangers of mixing the painkillers with sedatives or benzodiazepines that are often prescribed together by the pain doctors. And this particular combination is what ends up being the source of all the overdoses we see. For example, the deaths by overdose have tripled over the past several years. So much so that more people are dying now of prescription drug overdose than they are of motor vehicle accidents.
Wow.
And this is a new phenomenon. Every day I lose patients in my practice. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes, but the public doesn't get to hear it unless it's a celebrity. And then everybody knows about a celebrity, like when Prince died recently of an opioid overdose. But if it's not a celebrity, this happens every day, and it sort of gets swept under the rug. What happens when patients get hooked on the painkillers, they discover that heroin is cheaper, and sometimes they can't afford the painkillers, or the doctor cuts them off because they're overutilizing them, and they turn to heroin. And heroin has had a resurgence in our communities. Specifically, here in the local community, the heroin has been laced with fentanyl, which is a very powerful opiate, like 100 times more powerful than morphine. Mm-hmm. And many patients have died over the past couple of months with heroin laced with the powerful fentanyl. And this is a common occurrence in the Del Rey area, for example. But it doesn't really make the papers all that much because people are becoming immune to it, which is really sad.
I'm really, really sorry to cut you off like this because I'd love to keep on having you talk about this, but this is only a half-hour program. We only have about 4 minutes left. And if you don't mind, if you could please just give me some signs or symptoms, like early warning for a family member or a friend who might have a friend who, had a car accident or whatever happened, and they were prescribed some opiates, and now they need to be aware that they are actually beyond the point of using it for help and now addicted, and they might be, threatening their own life.
If people who are taking painkillers begin to use their medication more quickly than it's intended to last, if they're running out of their medication for the end of the month, if they are calling in to request early refills because they are taking more than they started out with, the opioid painkillers will produce tolerance, so patients will often find themselves requiring higher and higher doses to achieve the previous effect. So if you see someone in your family who is on painkillers and they are taking more and more or requiring more and more, that is a danger sign.
But what if you don't know that fact? Is there something you could see in their face? Is there a sallowness? Is there a...
If they're taking too much of the painkiller...
Oh, no. We just lost him just at the answer time.
Well,
Jack, do you know the answer to that?
Sure. You want to look for sudden changes in behavior. You want to look for people who are drowsy, who slur their words. I mean, the obvious types of things that you would look for. You want to look for people who normally got up early in the morning, who now sleep late. Now, sometimes with teenagers, that's hard to sort out because teenage behavior mirrors a lot of that. However, if they suddenly become reclusive, if they suddenly are accepting phone calls and running off out of the house unexpectedly, if they're out at odd hours, if normal behavior changes dramatically, rapidly, most people know it and they don't want to see it. They want to write it off to youthful high spirits or teenage angst or whatever. You take those things very seriously.
Does it change their appetite? Does it change? Oh, I think the doctor's back on the phone.
Sure. Bring him back.
Hi, we only have about 2-3 minutes, Doc. I'm glad you called back.
Okay. So I was talking about some of the physical signs. The other signs are when the patient begins to take the medication for other than pain control. For example, to get some energy or to feel a buzz for the euphoric effect, euphorogenic effect of the drugs. So someone at home can see them taking a little too many pills or a little too often. Or why are you taking that? You just took one a half hour ago. So you need to be on the lookout for taking more than one is supposed to. Also,
but will it change their skin tone? Will it change their weight factor? Will any of that change? Like any more obvious signs, or no? It's very subtle at first.
No, it is not that subtle if they're taking too much. You can really see the sedation aspect of it.
Sure, and Aldo, also over time you'll notice that the skin will become sallow, their eyes will be dilated, they'll tend to have poor posture, they'll droop,
correct. But by the time it gets to that point, it has been readily apparent to the close observer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Doc, I want to thank you so much for the call. Would you mind giving our listeners a way that they can call you directly? And of course, everything that they say to you, I know is kept in highest regard and confidence, but I want them to feel comfortable to be able to call you. So tell me your name, the name of your practice, and the best contact number.
I can give you a couple of numbers. This is my office is in Boca Raton, 561-368-2400. I am also the medical director at Retreat at Palm Beach, which is a company out of Pennsylvania who've been made a name for themselves up there and just came down to establish a presence in Florida. And you can look them up on the web, Retreat at Palm Beach County, and they might have a toll-free number, which I don't know offhand.
Okay, so just give your telephone number one last time, Doctor, and your full name for me, please.
Aldo, A-L-D-O, Morales, M-O-R-A-L-E-S, M-D. Boca 561-368-2400 or Retreat at Palm Beach.
Okay, Doctor, thank you so much for calling in, and I hope to have you on the show physically here one day, maybe back with Jack again next month sometime. I'm going to have to let you hang up for a minute. I'm going to wrap up the show with a final statement from Jack, if you don't mind, as to what you can best recommend to people that are trying to get someone into some sort of a treatment center, because I know that was a very big part of your life.
Sure, thanks, Liz. The one thing I will say about treatment centers is right now there's a big push by insurance companies in particular for medication-assisted treatment, and I'm not a big fan. So if someone is on drugs, I don't believe they should be treated with more drugs of the same type, and if so, only for a very short period of time. So when people go to treatment centers, they need to know what modality are those people going to treat their loved ones with.
Great point.
Yeah, right now abstinence is kind of held in disregard by parts of the medical community. But at the time that somebody can show me something that works better, I'll adopt it. So keeping people on buprenorphine or Suboxone or even worse, methadone, really is a big problem for me. So a lot of these kids get into treatment, they get put on these other medications, and it becomes just another drug of abuse for them. So that would be my real point of all of this.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that'll help parents who, when they're looking at these treatment centers, to think to themselves, what is the course of treatment that you use? Not just because it's recommended, but is it a course of treatment I, as a parent, would want my child on? Because to take one drug, replace it with another drug, it's kind of, I don't know that somebody has to be hard. I was told it's really excruciating to be hard, like cold, just stop. Maybe there has to be a slow
is.
digression?
It is very uncomfortable. In most cases, it's not medically dangerous, but it is horrendously uncomfortable. And so for a detox period on a very controlled, short basis, yes, the doctor will use medication.
Okay. That's them telling me the show is over.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jack Freiberg. Thank you so much for coming on the show with me. It's my pleasure to start working with you on a lot of projects that we'll start to talk about, food addictions, for instance. Thank you for listening to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman. Next month, we're going to be talking to a lot of people about what to look out for your children as they're getting into school and might be opened up to a life of drugs, and what signs you'll need to see. Again, to the Center for Family and Child Enrichment as our sponsor always. Thank you, Dr. Snipes and Dr. Kerwin. I very much appreciate your being participants on the show, and we'll have you on the show next week. Thank you, everybody. StayAliveandFit.com. Have a great night next week.
You've been listening to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman, a new innovative radio show that taps into what's happening now in the medical industry, featuring fitness experts, foodies, and medical professionals. Get it right here and be an active participant in your health. Mixed messages about what is best for your health can make you feel like you're on a runaway train. Get ready to hop aboard again next time for Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management,